For this high-end riser, we're going to need a little candle holder from Dollar Tree, one of these wood pieces from Dollar Tree, and some of this metal lace. Paint your pieces whatever color you want. I'm going to be using Waverly chalk paint in the Snow White color. I decided to paint everything completely separate. If you want to glue everything together and then paint it because it would be easiest for you, by all means, go right ahead. I didn't have a rhyme or reason why I was necessarily doing it like this. It's just how I decided to go about it. But I will tell you, painting this metal lace, it is not my favorite pastime, people. To attach everything, I decided to use a mix of Gorilla Glue gel and hot glue. That way I get my long-lasting hold and I have an immediate hold with the hot glue. I also trust my Gorilla Glue gel, so I know that it's going to make sure everything stays in its place. Especially since we're going to be putting glue on glass and metal and just different types of materials, it makes me feel a little bit fuzzier inside. And people, if you have never finagled this metal lace around anything in particular, get out your patient caps, okay? Because you're going to need some patience. Truth be told, it took me a good 15 minutes to get this really situated and curved, because as you bend, pieces are starting to pop one way, pop another way. So you got to keep pulling it away from your piece and bending as you go to make sure it curves properly, especially as you're putting the glue on so it presses against the glue. For this high-end home decor idea, you're going to need some candle holders. I picked these up from Dollar Tree and I absolutely love them. And grab 2 of these cones while you're at it. I know what you're thinking. No, we are not going to make a Christmas tree. These can be used to make so many different things, and I'm going to show you one right here. First, we're going to need to get rid of all that plastic because we're not going to need any of it. And look how perfectly these fit right inside these little candle holders. I'm going to use nautical rope for this. You can use twine, you can use ribbon, take the idea and remix it into what works for you. I am going to let you know, though, that unraveling this right here, prepare yourself. I was recently given a tip that works way better than the struggle I was having. When you're all done with that struggle, it'll be time to bring in the glue gun. We're going to need to start this off by putting just a little smoosh of glue right at the bottom, grabbing one end of that mean old nautical rope and start raveling. It was at this point I was praying that this was going to go all the way up. I really did not want to have to unravel another one of these things. It took me like 10 minutes to get it from unraveling around itself. And then I was recently given a little tip to solve that. You tape one end down. See, I'm here for you. And I listen to my community when they give me tips. I'm passing it along so you don't have the same struggles I do. You take one end of the nautical rope, tape it down to a surface, and then it will easily untangle itself. Well, as you're untangling it, of course, stopping it from retangling it as you're untangling it, if that makes sense. The good news, my friends, is it only takes one nautical rope to be able to wrap both of these little cones. I was happy about that. One whole nautical rope goes completely around the bottom of each one of these, and then you get to split the third one in half so you can wrap it around the top. When you do get to the point where you're ready to attach the extra nautical rope so that they meet, try to make sure that you line everything up where the ends are, so this way you'll have it facing in the back. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little messy even as you trim off those sections. So as you're putting it out in your home for decor, you have any extra frizzy bits sticking in the back and no one's going to see any of that. I did make sure to glue down as much of the excess as I possibly could, and then I added on these for a little something extra and love how these turned out. Feel free to glue your pieces down onto the candle holders if you want. I did not, so this way if I want to switch out the candle holders as I change my decor in my home, I can absolutely do that. For these large decorative candle holders, you're going to need 2 wall mirrors and grab you a basic candle holder from Dollar Tree. I went with these. I wanted something with a wide base. I decided to paint mine up with some spray paint, and I'm going to just use this charcoal color. Feel free to use whatever color you want, and if you want to use regular paint, I recommend chalk paint or a multi-surface. That would stick better to these materials than acrylic. Off camera, I went a couple different ways trying to attach these mirrors, and what I realized is that the candle holders, because the rim is so thin at the top, there is no real safety involved here if you want to put some weight on these suckers, and I don't like that. You could absolutely use like a large wood circle piece and put around the top, but you're still not getting a good attachment because the rim is really thin. So I took some of these large wood rings that I picked up from Dollar Tree, added some tacky glue and some hot glue, and pressed them down into the center of these, and that really gave me a nice base to attach the back of the mirrors onto and allow me to apply some weight onto it without having to worry about anything just sitting on the top of a super thin brace. If you go to recreate these at home and you want to use these wood rings, you will notice that there is the tiniest of gap between where the candle holder is and where you set the top of this mirror on here. If that bothers you, just make sure to paint that wood ring whatever color you've painted your piece and you'll be good to go. I let these dry a full 24 hours before putting anything on top of these, and I absolutely love how they turned out. I found this beautiful little wood Corbel I had in my stash. I had to pick it up at a thrift store at some point from somewhere. It has a little hole in the back, and I'm like, we could definitely turn this into a beautiful stone shelf. How are we going to do that? By all means, by adding this little joint right here that I picked up from Dollar Tree onto the top and giving it a nice paint job. I'm going to be using DIY's paint in the letterpress. Feel free to use whatever chalk paint or type of paint that you want, and I highly recommend a gray tone. You could add a little bit of baking soda, you could give it some texture to create that actual stone effect. Lucky for me, this paint does a really good job of that all on its own. I love simple DIY projects like this that you can take and add a little bit of paint and maybe 2 or 3 pieces and create something completely different out of what you had, getting an amazing high-end look. Once both pieces were completely dry, I took some of my favorite Type Bond wood glue and a little bit of hot glue and plopped right onto the top of this Corbel. This way that wood glue is giving me a nice long hold, and that hot glue is gonna get on there right immediately to hold it in place while the wood glue is drying. Once your piece is completely dry, if you wanna plop a sealer over top of this, you go right ahead. Let me know in the comments below if you love creating pieces with Corbels. Next time you're in Dollar Tree, grab one of their round laser cutout wood wall decor pieces. They have these in several different designs, but I really like this mountain one and wanted to show you a cool way that you could add this to your decor. First up, you're gonna need to pick you a paint color. I decided to go with black, but please remix this idea and use it to work for your home decor. I'm also using a pouncer and a paintbrush plus my little water bottle to get in all these little dents and smoosh the paint around as much as possible. You wouldn't think it, but it is not the easiest craft to get in all these little crevices on this laser piece. Having the pouncer, the paintbrush, and the water bottle really kind of helps to just move this process along. And if you don't want to do that at all, get you some spray paint and give this sucker a nice coat of some spray paint. That'll work too. However, you're not going to get out of this next part with some spray paint. You will need to pick a paint color, okay? I'm going to use whites, and then we're going to give this a coat of paint just where everything is raised. And I alternated this part between a paintbrush and a makeup sponge. If you're going to use a makeup sponge for a piece like this, make sure that it's practically dry, people, because as you're tapping that sucker all over the raised part, it is possible that you are going to smush some of that paint in the sections you want to keep black. And it's fine if it's a little bit, you can come back and fix it. If you want to fill the hole at the top where the tag was, you go right ahead. I decided that I wanted to get a little mold and take some of my favorite paper clay and shove some in here just to put as a tiny accent right at the top. It's just an idea. Again, if you want to fill it up with some spackling, you go right ahead and allow that to dry, or wood putty, whatever. And for anyone looking to try out the clay, I usually keep a link for it in my Amazon affiliate link down in the description box. Just click the more button right underneath this video. And a little tip, if you ever notice your clay is sticking in molds, sprinkle a little of cornstarch on that sucker before you press the clay in. I usually do pretty good with mine. To attach our little tiny clay piece, I'm just going to use some of this Type Bond, smush a little on the back and spread it around, and then press on the top. Do be mindful whenever you do this that if you press too hard, you could completely flatten that sucker out and then you won't see your design. I then gave this whole piece a nice second coat once our little clay piece was dry. And then, because crafting isn't always perfect and I make a lot of mistakes, I had to go back with the black paint and fill in where I had white on the sections I wanted to stay black. I also took some of that same paint and did a little bit of a dusting over top of our clay piece. This way those raised sections kind of popped out. Off camera, I painted this little candle holder from Dollar Tree. Use whatever you would like for the stand for this piece into cubes. I'm going to use the cubes to attach one on the front and one on the back, so this way we can set this right on the candle holder. For a little added security, I grabbed my tacky glue so this way I could go over all the attachments, making sure that if the hot glue by any chance had any issues keeping the piece in place, this tacky glue had its back and my little decor piece would not fall apart. Trip to Dollar Tree, I found these beautiful candle holders. Now they are completely high-end on their own. I mean, seriously, look how beautiful they are. But guess what? We can stack them fairly easily. And I'm like, oh, I definitely got some scrap wood in my stash that we can make some really cool high-end pieces with these. For our bond, I'm going to be using some Gorilla Glue gel. You could use E6000, that'll work too. I highly recommend using something other than just some hot glue. That never seems to hold glass on top of glass or together at all for glass for me. So I like using something else. For the paint, we're going to be using some of this. Now use whatever paint you want. It's in my experience with glass, chalk paint or a clay chalk paint or a multi-surface works best to get some really good solid coverage quickly. You do you. And I also like using a pouncer and tappity tap tap tapping the paint on that sucker versus a brush, again, with glass. You do you. It might seem a little textury at first, but that's usually okay. Most paints, at least the ones in my experience, especially this, it levels itself out. And here you might be like, Brandy, why are you using a pouncer on this wood? There's no real reason why I'm using the pouncer. Use a brush if you want. The wood is really rustic and it is not sanded down. So using a brush is going to work just as effectively if you use my little tip with spritzing some water over the rough edges. Absolutely sand your wood down if you want. I do not want to sand this down. One, I'm cutting video time, and two, I like rustic things. You see, this is completely rough, and you can take the pouncer or a paintbrush. You will use extra paint doing this, trying to get in those rough edges. So sanding it down will help prevent that, but also using a little spritzy spritz of some water will really get in those rough edges. And then you just come on in with some paints and you are done in just a couple seconds. And do keep in mind that you choose to use a pouncer or a sponge, because I use a sponge sometimes when I paint too. It is possible working with rough edged wood, it could get stuck in the rough edges. So might be best if you want to avoid possibly have that happen to you, just use a paintbrush. Once all the pieces were completely dry, I glued everything together and absolutely love how this high-end piece turned out. For this hanging wall decor set, I'm going to be using 2 of these, but you can use whatever size and whatever kind of frames you would like. You're going to need some tumbling blocks and some paint sticks. And while you're at it, you might as well bring on in the miter shears, because we're going to need to cut these paint sticks down. Or use whatever cutting technique you would like. I'm going to be using these. And I'm going to cut 2 pieces the exact same size that just cover the front of these frames. So in total, you'll need 4 paint stick bits. We are not going to be needing the glass in these frames. So go ahead and remove them and shove them in your craft stash somewhere for another project for another day. If you want to leave these little metal bits on the back of your frames, you go right ahead. They always end up being a pain for me no matter what if I leave them in. So I just grab some needle nose pliers and just remove the suckers so I don't have to worry about them later or possibly want to remove them later. To attach the tumbling blocks and our paint sticks, I'm going to be using some tacky glue. Now all I'm really doing is creating a teeny tiny little basket right on the outside of these frames. And people, feel free to use your hot glue to make sure that everything is sticking immediately. I knew that I was going to be running out and this was going to have several hours to dry before I carried on to the next part. To recreate the basket, you're just going to need 4 tumbling blocks and 2 of the paint sticks. And that's for this size little frame piece. Obviously, how many you're going to need is going to vary depending on the size, but I put the 2 paint sticks on the front, kind of like a pallet, and left a little gap on there. I'm using my little water bottle to give these a couple little squirts. So this way it's nice and wet, and my antique Waverly wax will go over these pieces quick and easy. If you don't want to use antique Waverly wax, paint these whatever color works for you. And if you want to paint the pieces individually, you go right ahead. This is just how I was rolling with the project. For this next part, you're gonna need to bring on in the wire cutters. Well, you don't have to, but I'm going to, because we're gonna need to use them to snip the entire top and the entire bottom off of this little wire basket. Also, Dollar Tree does have the trash cans that are the same material, the same style. So if you want to get more bang for your buck to have more faux chicken wire laying around, grab those trash cans when you see them. It's always a great little hack to make for smaller projects. Now, if you have regular chicken wire laying around, you want to use that, power to you. I didn't have any. After about 20 minutes of cutting this wire basket up, I had me nice little sections that fit right over our frame. Now it was time for us to bring on in the stapler. And honestly, you can use whatever means you want to fit and attach these on here. I'm going to show you in a second that you can actually cut them down to fit in the hole, or you can cut them to hang over the hole and then just staple in the back. You could absolutely use some glue, whatever works best for you. The stapler is always my friend. And as you can see, if you cut this down right, it will fit inside the back of these size frames. On their own, I think they look really cute just sitting them around. You could easily switch out the little greenery for floral pieces with the seasons. These are also the perfect size to put little clothespin and wallet-sized pictures on, or chalkboards, and write little messages and hanging them on the walls around your home. For this project, we're gonna need just one and a couple other little things like these you can pick up from Dollar Tree, little wood rings, some beads, or whatever you want to use to create some legs, and lots of nautical rope. Now don't mind mine, you'll see it's cut into sections. That's because this is my scraps. I didn't have any solid piece, so I'm gonna make it work. If you have a whole solid piece of nautical rope, that'd be fine, and you can remix this idea with whatever color works best for your decor. I completely untangled the nautical rope, so we were only using one single piece of the nautical rope at a time, and I switched off using hot glue and some wood glue to attach the rope. And I just took my time starting at the bottom and made sure to keep all the sections that I'm going to connect in the back of our box. When I was just about finished wrapping this rope around our crate here, I noticed that there were a couple little gaps, and I really did not care for the way that that looked. So I grabbed the hot glue and I smooshed a couple little squirts in between those sections and gently pushed them together to close any of those spots. For this next little part, I'm going to use some twine. And I'm going to use just enough twine to wrap one time around the top. And no, one single little strand of this twine is not going to cut it. I'm going to need to cut many, many strands. I think I cut 12 in total to get this look. The cool thing about layering twine like this, it allows you to manipulate it. And you can create a nice fluffy layer like this, depending on how tight or how loose you have your little spiral just by twirling the twine together. I used to make thread bracelets and necklaces and anklets and all that stuff when I was younger. So that's where this idea is hailing from at the top of this basket. Am I showing my age? When I was happy with the way that I had the twine twirled together, I lathered up the hot glue right on the top of the crate and then gingerly pressed this down. And I did this section by section. I did the front first, and then I did each side individually, twirling the twine slowly, holding it in place, and then gently pressing. When I got to the back, I just cut off all the excess. The wallpaper at Dollar Tree makes easy decor pieces, especially for frames. You can get a lot of DIYs out of these if you place your frames perfectly in certain sections. However, be mindful that your items you're trying to trace with work. Oh my God. How many pens is it gonna take? Why does this happen to me when I'm just trying to trace something? All right, pencil, don't fail. You want to know what the worst part is, people? I didn't even throw them pens away. They went right back in my little craft hoard to the side. So in the next video, I'll probably be complaining about them too. Anyhow, once I got these traced down onto our wallpaper, I cut them to size and left them as they are. I didn't even take the sticker backing off. This way, if you want to easily switch them out, you don't have to worry about that. You can just replace them. We're going to start off this project needing one of Dollar Tree's wire baskets, and in a second you'll see why I chose that one. Also, one of Dollar Tree's crates, and a bunch of tumbling tower blocks. We are firstly going to use the tumbling blocks to create a base that fits underneath of our wire basket. You can make this as large or as small as you want, just make sure it mostly fits. And then we're going to take some wood glue and hot glue to attach everything completely together. As you can see here, my base is slightly smaller than the bottom of the basket, and I'm completely content with that. But if you want to add more blocks, just throw some extra blocks on there. It's really not a big deal. It's just an aesthetic look, and it's going to make sure that everything stays together, so you do need a wood base. Now it's time to build a tower, and I'm using this basket because the wire gaps are larger than the other style baskets that Dollar Tree has. It's perfect for me to be able to use wood glue and hot glue and alternate putting tumbling blocks in each piece in the center, so this way it holds the wire basket down into place just like this. Once you have those 4 blocks into place, you're pretty much good to go, and you can either build straight up like I am, or you could build it off to the side and then just press it down. You might have a little bit more of an even build, as you can see in the end result. Mine's a little wonky, but it's not too noticeable for me, so I was fine with it. But if you want something that makes the blocks match up a little bit better, just do that off to the side and then attach to the 4 at the bottom you put on here. For a base at the top, I just glued 3 tumbling blocks together and then applied more of that wood glue and hot glue and attached our crate. It was at this moment that I realized the neutrals didn't really match. I grabbed some of my anti-waverly wax and a baby wipe to smear some on here, so this way everything kind of blended together and looked really nice. And this was a paint, so if you want to recreate this and you're going to paint it, do it before you put everything together. To tie the color of the wire basket in with the top of the crate, I decided just to grab a little rub-on transfer and put down in the corner. You can absolutely use whatever rub-on transfers you would like, but for those wondering where these in particular came from, they are part of my own creative brand called TDS, and they can be found on my website. I'll have a link down in the comments pinned, as well as a link to my website in the description box. Just click the more button right under this video for anyone that wants to check them out. This piece could be used for so many different things, but for the video and staging purposes, I put some greenery in here with a little bit of florals and a candle accent. Next time you're in Dollar Tree, head on over to their wood crafts section and grab some of their wood blanks, or all of the blanks really, because they got so many goodies to craft with. But how about these? Are we including these in wood blanks? I kind of feel like they are. Well, for today's video, we're going to include them and need 6 of these to start out with, but we'll need 8 total. For this large wall shelf, you can remix the colors to fit whatever decor you would like. I'm going to keep mine neutral with a little bit of a modern touch, and we're going to start off by just flipping them over onto their backside. For the attachments, I'm going to start off by taking some Titebond Quick and Thick and putting it in all the little seams where these pallets are going to be attached to each other. When I was happy with how the first 4 were attached, I then brought on in the stapler. Now we're gonna need some extra attachments, just not some hot glue or some, wood glue. We need them staples. However, I wish I could make this stuff up. The stapler! It really is a stapler. I love the stapler though. But look at that, 2 at a time, come on. If that does ever happen to you, just grab a little hammer and just a little tappity tap 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 and it'll go right on down. I let that dry for about 30 minutes and then grabbed 2 more pallets. Added some more wood glue to the bottom here. And people, I'm going to be so real with y'all. I did not measure this, but you can see that I am putting staples up through. I eyeballed it, I wung it, and I wung it so good. I rarely ever wing stuff enough that I don't have staples popping through where I don't want them. But for this one, I did pretty good. Then I took some more of that wood glue and put on the sections of the bottom that I knew were going to touch these other 2 pallets. So this way we had more pallets underneath the shelf lip that we created. I even grabbed a little paintbrush and took a minute just kind of painting it on there, and I let that dry for about 30 minutes. And then I went and found my miter shears and brought them on in. So we could cut down these square dowel rods I picked up from Hobby Lobby. Now you can get these types of things at Walmart and Home Depot. And if you don't want to use these, you could absolutely take some towering tumbling blocks and line your shelf on the edges with those. But as you see here, it's just simpler for me to kind of take this one whole piece and then chop it down where I need to be able to attach it. And believe it or not, people, these particular dowels at Hobby Lobby were only 99 cents. Now they have different sizes, so the prices range, but for 99 cents, I grabbed them joints. Plus they're gonna work perfectly for our frame. And for that modern touch, I'm just giving them a nice coat of black paint. To attach the frame, I just used some more of that wood glue with a little bit of hot glue for an instant hold, and grabbed my sawtooth hammer and hangers, and I do believe these are down in my Amazon affiliate link in the description box, to hammer in on the back so this way we could hang our beautiful shelf on the wall. For this matching tabletop decor set, you're going to need 2 of Dollar Tree's wall mirrors. For this project, I'm going to be using these, and we're also going to need some little pots. I had these, from 2 succulents, and I figured we'll use them. They're cement. And we're going to need some dowels, some good sized dowels, actually. I picked these up from Dollar Tree. In case you didn't know, you can grab these. They are 2 in a pack, and I think that's pretty good for $1.25 for the size of these. But for the size of this particular project, we're just going to need 1, and we're going to need to cut that in half. So we're going to need to bring on in the miter shears to accomplish this, or whatever cutting tool you want. I'm just going to use these, put the dowel in there by eyeballing it, and cut it in the center. Then we're just going to take some black chalk paint and give the little cement pot piece and the dowels a nice coat of paint to match the mirrors. And feel free to take this idea and remix it using whatever paint colors you want. Even repaint the mirror if you want. Just make sure to put something protective over that mirror section so you don't get any paint over it. We're going to now need to cut off a little section of the bottom of one of these mirrors. And you can do this by whatever means works best for you. I just took the miter shears and clipped down at one of the points, and it snapped right off. This gave me just enough room to squeeze that dowel right in there, so this way we could attach it onto the mirror. Do make sure that you have enough of that dowel on the bottom of that mirror so it will hold the weight of it. I went back with the same black paint and touched up all the little spots just to make sure that everything matched. Now, if I'm being 100% honest, I pride myself on trying to save you all money. So this way you don't go out, buy the exact same thing I use, and then it not work for you at home the way it worked for me. I would get a bigger planter pot than these little cement things that the succulents were in. While this looks very high-end and I love the end result, it is a little top heavy and it does wobble back and forth just a little bit. Next time you're in Dollar Tree, grab a bottle of their Mod Podge. And while I was here, I decided to grab a pizza pan because, believe it or not, one thing I haven't decoupaged yet is one of these. People, we're gonna have to just skip the editing real quick. Listen, what is this? What is this made of? Oh my god. I'm just gonna paint over it, okay? We won't talk about it because I don't have no glue gun. Since we're going to be decoupaging on metal, it's important that we use a paint to prime our piece that we know is going to stick to that material really well. If you don't have access to a DIY retailer, here are 2 other options I have used many times that I can pick up from Walmart, and the folk art I can usually grab from Hobby Lobby if you have one of those local to you as well. For this project, I decided to go with this because I know it works really well against metal, and if you're ever interested in trying out some DIY paint, or looking for a retailer, my friend Sammy at Unicorn Dust Designs sells it. I usually keep a link down in the description box. And on a side note, people, look at the size of this pouncer I had in my stash. It took me just a couple minutes to get the first coat on this pizza pan. Whenever I'm painting on metal or glass, I always like to use a pouncer or a sponge. And then I tappity tap 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 the product all over our project. And usually it takes 1 or 2 coats and I get a really nice coverage instead of painting it. And a quick little tip I want to share with you, this works for glass or metal. You want to take your finger and scrape along the paint, making sure it is attached before you start decoupaging anything. If you notice with those tiny little scrapes that your paint is coming up, your Mod Podge is probably not going to stick to the surface as you're decoupaging. You're going to have some separation. So do one of 2 things. Apply another layer of the paint that you're using and allow that to dry, or switch up the paint because the paint you're using might not be made for that surface. And in some cases, it also might not be fully dry. In worst case scenario, you absolutely do not have access to the paint. You can use Rust-Oleum Clear Matte spray paint, seal over it, let it dry. That has worked for me in a pinch, but brushing on sealers with paint that doesn't stick to those materials can be tricky, so just be careful. How about this napkin, people? Isn't it pretty? This was sent to me by a subscriber. Thank you so much. I am so excited to be using this on our pizza pan, and yes, it fits perfectly, but we got to trim it down to size. And there are so many ways to do this, but for this particular project, I'm just going to flip the napkin on the back side so we have a nice clear visual of where the pencil marks are going to be. I decided I am going to keep this very clean cut and I'm not going to add anything around the border. So I want this as precise and as perfect as I can get it. I made sure to hold my one hand and my arm kind of over the napkin as much as I could so it didn't move around while I was doing this. Then when I was happy with the circle I made, I tore a little corner to reveal the top decorative layer and then sectioned it enough apart that it went over the piece that we're going to be pulling apart before I started cutting. And then I just cut the entire circle out and peeled the top layer off. I was worried that if I waited to pull the sneaky layer off the back after I trimmed this down that I might have ruined a side, and I needed it perfect. And I needed to leave that extra ply on there so I could see the pencil mark. I didn't want to pencil the back of the decorative layer because the napkin was so dark. I knew I wasn't going to be able to see it to cut the perfect circle. For our application, I'm going to use a fan brush. This is just my go-to whenever I'm decoupaging a napkin. It just works best for me. By all means, use whatever you would like. I made sure the napkin was in the exact spot that I wanted it and then peeled a section back. I applied a little bit of Mod Podge and then started spreading out a very small section. There are a ton of ways to decoupage and there are a lot of decoupage artists. I like to believe that the things that I share in my content doing this for so long are just things that work best for me, and I like to share them hoping they help you at home. And one way I found that really reduces your wrinkles on your napkin projects is to do a tiny bit of Mod Podge and then to press down your napkin gently over it. If you oversaturate your piece with a ton of Mod Podge, because I know it feels like you need a whole lot to get it to work, it's possible it's going to create wrinkles. But in the event that I do have too much Mod Podge in certain sections, I like to use a dry sponge. I usually get these in a pack from Walmart and I'll cut them down in size and just push down in the sections. This helps to absorb any extra Mod Podge that may be there into the sponge, and it also helps to flatten out your piece in the exact spot without smearing it back and forth. Sometimes when I use cling wrap, it will tear my napkin. Once your sponge gets all crusty musty, sometimes after you've used it a bunch of times, you will notice it starts to get hard. The Mod Podge will harden it. I'll then cut that sucker up and reuse it to apply paint on different things. And then I just flip my napkin the opposite side of where I've applied it and continue the same method until I have a complete application. Now, while this is drying, you can take the opportunity to cut up your florals or paint any extra pieces that you want to attach to your pizza pan. If you want to put a layer of sealer over this, once it is all dry, you go right ahead before you apply on your florals and ribbons and things like that. This would also be perfect with a little hanger for you to hang on the wall or just leave it to sit around your home. For this little riser, we're going to be taking one of Dollar Tree's scrap wood pieces and doing a napkin iron-on decoupage method to it with the natural wood. You can absolutely paint your piece up if you want. Your napkin design will pop more, but I love sharing how you can use pieces in their natural state to look like it's blended into the wood. To get started, go ahead and throw a nice healthy layer of Mod Podge all over your piece of wood. When it looks like this, set it off to the side to dry naturally for a couple hours. Then pick your napkin, my friends, and you're gonna need to get that top decorative layer away from that sneaky underneath layer. There are several different ways to remove your napkins. One of the easiest is just to tear a corner. Usually it reveals the sneaky under layer and I can just pull them right apart. Now it's time to bring in the iron and make sure to grab you some parchment paper. You're gonna want to put that right over top of your napkin. Pick an end and slowly push the iron back and forth, moving from one side to the next. This is just going to help push any possible bubbling or wrinkling all the way to the other side. So instead of going all around the edges and then coming back to the middle and possibly having some bubbles, it just eliminates that. Before you start removing the excess napkin, just go around the edges and make sure it's all completely attached. I'm just taking my finger sander and going straight down to pull all the excess napkin off. Now I want to round off those edges. This is going to really allow that napkin to completely look blended into that piece of wood. And I do not recommend doing this if your napkin is not completely on your piece of wood. It is going to just ruin your piece. For the legs of this little riser, I'm just going to be using some of Dollar Tree's little Christmas trees. Use whatever you would like for your legs. I'm also going to be creating a smidge of an ombre look with some antique Waverly wax so that the bottom is slightly darker as it blends to the top. Just a cool little aesthetic accent to this piece. And then I'm taking some tacky glue and attaching all of them to the bottom. I allowed this piece to dry completely overnight and then came back in with some of Mod Podge's hard coat. This stuff is water resistant, so in the event if we want to put it in the bathroom or the kitchen, we are protected. And a good tip to help reduce any further wrinkling even after this is dry, apply your sealer in thin layers. This is my first time seeing these larger craft wood pieces at Dollar Tree. I picked up 2 of them because I feel like they're the perfect size for this pallet shelf I want to build. However, people, they are really rough around the edges. I took my little sander and just knocked all the stuff off around the top and the edges. We want it nice and smooth because we're going to be decoupaging this beautiful napkin onto the top of both of these pieces. They're going to be our actual shelf pieces. So that's what we're going to see is the design of this beautiful napkin. Plus, I love how this napkin has just like a whole kind of different design going on throughout the whole thing. There's lots of use here. If you've never decoupaged a napkin before, a good tip is to always remember to remove the sneaky layers off the bottom. You're just going to want to use the top decorative layer on your decoupage. I like to just tear a corner. Most of the time it shows me those sneaky layers. It's quick and I just pull the whole piece completely apart. And this is not the only way to do this. There are several different ways. This is just what works best for me. I decided to cut the napkin in half so I had equal portions to use our Mod Podge to decoupage onto the pieces of wood. And real quick, I want to share with y'all something to help you maybe save some money. I go through these all the time. And if you go into the stores, sometimes they're pretty expensive. However, if you have a Ross local to you, I don't know if you know, but they have craft sections and you can get sets like this pretty inexpensively. I want to do the iron-on method to these boards, and people, one thing that grosses me out while I'm crafting is Mod Podge boogers. Ew. Ew. What is come on. Hey. Ew. Get out. Oh. It won't come out. I can't even stand it. I started gagging trying to edit that. That was all I could do. I'm sorry. The editing could have been better there, but that was all I had. I can't rewatch that section. You're going to want to take your Mod Podge without the boogers and make sure there is a nice, healthy layer all over the top of your boards, especially whenever you're going to do the iron-on method. You want to make sure that when you're all done putting your layer on, it's heavy and thick all over the piece. The worst part about this is it normally takes a couple hours for it to completely dry, and I like to allow mine to dry at room temperature. But while that's drying, it's always good to make the most of our time, so I grabbed the little wood pallets and my little spritzer bottle and gave them a couple little squirts, and then took some black chalk paint and applied a layer. You'll notice that I left one piece of the palette completely unpainted, and that's because we're gonna cut that sucker off using our miter shears. And people, honestly, cut it off with whatever works best for you. I just keep these right next to me, and I know that I can get up pretty close to the pallets. We only need the first 3 of each palette, so we can put on the side of our shelf that we're creating. When I was done trimming them down, I took a little bit of that black paint and went over anything that needed some touch-ups. While they're drying, it is time to bring on in the irons so we can iron on our beautiful napkin to these pieces that are finally dry. Once you have your napkin in the exact spot that you want it, grab you some parchment paper so you can apply over top of the napkin while you're doing your iron on. This is going to protect the napkin and protect your iron all at the same time and allow you to get a nice smooth finish. And then just work from one side to the next. Before you go sanding anything off, check all your edges, making sure that that napkin is butterly melted onto the Mod Podge and the top of that wood. And people, just in case you forget to check a section or whatever, it's a good idea to get in the habit of when you're sanding off stuff like this to go straight down. So this way it just disconnects your piece. If you go back and forth, it's possible it can shred it. I'm taking some of the same black paint and trimming all around the edge where the napkin is not. When everything was completely dry, I grabbed my current favorite wood glue and my hot glue and started attaching everything. Now, how you attach it is completely up to you. I decided that I wanted to start by assembling the pallets together, just so this way when I put them on the sides of our shelving unit, that they were kind of already together with a slight hold. So I could reinforce with more wood glue and more hot glue as I assembled everything together at one time. If you want, and I showed you right here, you can add a little bit more wood glue and hot glue and put a tumbling block at the bottom just for a little bit of extra reinforcement. And feel free, people, I know I didn't paint the underside. Make sure you paint yours if you want to. For the sake of time, I did not. After I was able to get the 2 shelves in place on the pallets, I then took the other pallet that I put together, the other little set, and put all the glue in the sections I wanted to put it on at one time. So this way I could just put that on the other side at one time instead of trying to do piece by piece. Next time you're in Dollar Tree, head on over to their frame section and grab some of their new arch frames. They have 2 different sizes and I grabbed a bunch because I have some ideas that I'm going to share with you today. For this arch frame wall photo decor set, I am going to use 2 of the larger frames and 1 of the smaller frames. To start off, we're going to need to remove the back and set the glass off to the side. Now there are a bunch of different options at Dollar Tree in their little wall creation set, but I seen these and thought they would look extremely high-end, cut into pieces to create a set. I decided to take the lazy route here and just flip the pictures over that were inside the frames. You could absolutely cut down a piece of regular paper so you had a blank slate. And then I cut down the wall stickers to size to fit inside of these arch frames. You can actually get a lot out of these just cutting them up, and there are a ton of different designs that you can choose from doing it like this. Since the backing is transparent, you could even use different color paper or put a beautiful napkin back here so you have a nice design that you could see through the translucency. I thought this looked pretty amazing on its own. When I was happy with that, I just gingerly placed the glass back into the frames and then put the pieces completely together. I decided to sell these, hanging them on the wall. People you would never know, you spent under $2 for each one of these pieces. They are absolutely stunning. Dollar Tree had these little wood blocks and I thought these would be perfect for a hanging shelf with some pallets. We're gonna need 2 pallets for this particular project. If you want to make a set, you'll need 4 plus one of these little guys, which is really just like an extra bit that was cut off from previous pallets in my stash. So I can attach the pallets together. I'm just gonna cut a popsicle stick in half and use a little bit of Type On quick and thick wood glue and some hot glue right in the center of where these 2 meet. Then I took a little bit of that wood glue and that hot glue and put it on the edge of our wood block and attached the pallets. If you want to attach a clamp to this and let it set for like 30 minutes, you go right ahead. For the sake of time, I did not and just kept on rolling with the project. I also attached our little fence piece right to the front and then brought in a stencil with some painter's tape to just tappity tap 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 a little bit of black chalk paint right onto the top of this with a makeup sponge for a little extra design on our piece. I did the same thing right to the front on the opposite side. When your piece is all dry, if you want to add some sealer over it, you go right ahead. For this frame decor piece, we're going to need one of these wire baskets, or if you see Dollar Tree's trash cans, they're a little bit bigger, grab those joints. And get yourself a floating frame. I always feel like these are such a great deal for $1.25. We're going to remove the glass from the frame and just put that over in our craft board because we're not going to need it. And then snip off the wire from our wire basket so we can create a faux chicken wire backgrounds here. And truth be told, get the trash can. There was not enough wire here to really cover the back of the frame. So once I had it down to this size, I had to snip it in half and then kind of overlap it. You'll see in the end reveal. I tried to measure it up as best as I can, But if you're anything like me long term, that would annoy me seeing that in the background. However, this idea is fire, so I rolled on with it because I gotta offer you all options. The tricky part to attaching this wire was figuring out what I could put inside the frames. And lucky me, I had some extra tumbling tower blocks and put 4 in here as a brace. And I've used this method before inside the frames, so I know it works well. And you can take 4 more and put them on top of the wire once you have them in place, and it will hold them down. If you want to paint them so this way they aren't a different color through the wire, you go right ahead. Make sure you're using some E6000 along with your hot glue or some Gorilla Glue gel, so this way you have an amazing hold. This shelf also has some little holes in the back, so this would also look amazing hung up on the wall, and you could make as many sets as you would like. As much as I love cutting down my own wood, I really appreciate the fact that Dollar Tree started carrying these large pieces of craft wood for $1.25, and I like to find different ways to use them. So I also picked up 2 of these wood hanging decor pieces and 2 of the Dollar Tree arched frames. For our tabletop decor piece, we could fill these holes in, but instead it actually fits perfectly removing them. So I decided to just snip off the ends and then take some white paint to paint all the pieces of wood so that way they match our frames. You could obviously paint this and the frames whatever color you would like. When I was all done painting these, I popped them off to the side so they could dry and then removed the pieces from the frames. I took the glass out because I'm not going to be using that. You can obviously keep it in yours. And then I also removed the little mechanism on the back. It popped off easily. You could absolutely paint this whatever color you would like. I decided for time's sake to just leave it as it is. Then I grabbed a stencil and a pouncer so we could just tappity tap 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 a little design on the sides. There are so many different ways that you could completely remix this idea to do what works best for you in your home. If you didn't want to use the actual backings, you could cut out cardboard or a piece of coaster board. I did not use any painter's tape to hold down the stencil for this because I was terrified it would rip up the piece of cardboard that it was there, so I just used my hands. Then I took some of the same paint, went over the frame just to make sure that everything matched well with the wood, with the stencil to the frames. People, a little tip I want to share with y'all is that you're going to need something a little extra to hold your plastic and your wood together, okay? So grab some Tight Bond Quick and Thick or your E6000 or Gorilla Glue gel and put it in the sections that make sense for your attachment. I made sure not to overlap mine so they don't cancel out, and look how perfect these frames fit right on this large piece of wood from Dollar Tree. It's perfect. It's like it was meant to be put together. I applied the same method to the sides, and you'll notice, yes, I didn't paint the backs of everything. Make sure you do it if that bothers you. For the sake of time with the video, I wanted to just share the idea, and I might have skipped a few corners, okay? Give me some grace, my friends. But still, how beautiful did this piece turn out? And you can make it farmhouse, you can make it modern, you can make it industrial. So many different ways you can reuse this idea to fit your home decor. For this floral frame tabletop decor piece, you'll need one of these arch frames from Dollar Tree, and to remove the back of it, we're only going to be using the actual framed arch. And then pick a color. Any color. I'm going to be using DIY's Mermaid Tail. I've been loving this paint. And not just the paint, but this particular type of color. I've even been like using spray paints and just, I don't know why I'm loving this color right now. It took 2 coats to get it like this. Obviously use whatever color you would like. And then grab you a piece of floral foam and cut out a size to pull out of the floral foam so this way your frame fits in it. To attach the frame to the floral foam, I'm just using a little bit of tacky glue. You're going to want to let that dry so this way you can stick your floral pieces in here. I am florally challenged, but I must say I feel like the florals I put to go with this looked really, really pretty, and I love how simple this piece was and how it turned out. For this decoupage pedestal stand, we're going to need to start off by grabbing us a Dollar Tree basket and one of these industrial candle holders. For the top of the tray, we're going to need a round or an oval piece. I didn't have any at my local Dollar Tree. This was in my stash, so I'm just going to roll with this. I want to do the iron-on method to the top of this piece, so I'm taking a lot of Mod Podge and applying it to all the sections of this round piece that I want it to attach to. If you want a nice crisp line around your edges where you separate the piece you're decoupaging, make sure to take your time and apply nice thick layers all around the edges. When your piece looks like this, set it off to the sides and let it dry for a couple hours naturally. For our decoupage portion, we're going to be using this beautiful decoupage tissue paper. Over on my Facebook page, I do have a TDS community group where we just share all things related to crafts and decoupage and TDS. I put out a little poll over there and asked them what section of this paper that they like the best, and the section we're going to decoupage on the top of this won. And for anyone wondering what is TDS, it stands for the DIY Struggle. It is my brand, and over on my website, thediystruggle.com, I have a decoupage paper line with over 40 designs for you to choose from, a transfer line, small rice paper prints, and digital downloads. A question I get asked a lot is if you can iron on tissue paper, and that is why I wanted to do this particular project, is to show you that you absolutely can. I want to save as much of this paper as possible, so I decided to just trace around the part that I wanted, and I just cut that out. Now it's time for us to bring on in our iron. This little sucker usually sits right next to me at the craft table. It is not the exact iron that you have to use for projects like this, so please don't feel like this is the only iron. You can use whatever iron you would like. I do turn mine all the way up before I begin. You're going to want to make sure to grab you some parchment paper. This is going to help you apply your piece. It's going to protect your paper from getting any possible burn marks from the iron. It's also going to help reduce any ability for your iron to stick to your paper or to the project if there's Mod Podge around it. The parchment paper does a multitude of things. I also get asked very often, can you use wax paper? Wax paper is not heat resistant. Wax paper is mostly used to stop as like a non-stick surface. Parchment paper is heat resistant, so it does make a little bit of a difference. Now, I'm not saying I've never used wax paper in a pinch, but you know, parchment paper is what you're supposed to use. And one rule of thumb that I kind of try to follow whenever I'm doing this method is to pick a side and go from one side to the next. This will help prevent any bubbling up in the center. When you're all done, check around the edges to make sure everything's attached, and then get a little piece of sandpaper and go around sanding. I like to just go straight down with my sandpaper just in case anything isn't attached around the edge. We don't have any bunching and can fix that. Once your piece is completely dry, if you want to put some sealer over it, you go right ahead. Make sure you do little thin layers instead of going in heavy. It's going to help reduce wrinkles as it dries. Now it's time to assemble our piece. You can leave your basket in the shape that it is, but I wanted mine a little bubbly, and this stuff is easy to manipulate. So I just made mine look like this, and then I flipped it over on the bottom and grabbed the top of our tray and put it into place. I flipped it upside down and then grabbed this little wood piece. You could use whatever wood piece you want as long as it fits on top of our little industrial candle holder here. I'm using tacky glue and hot glue to be able to attach this to the metal basket and have something solid for our metal candle holder to attach to. You can skip this next part if you want to, but I wanted to add some fairy lights, at least for the staging purposes, and an extra idea because it looks so amazing. You can remove this obviously if you just tape it in here. Feel free to glue yours down. Take the idea and remix it into whatever works for your home decor. I absolutely just think this idea is so amazing. Look how awesome this looks. Next time you're in Dollar Tree, pick up some of their dishwasher safe Mod Podge. For this dishwasher safe Mod Podge coaster idea, we're going to leave the coaster just as it is and take a layer of the dishwasher safe Mod Podge and put a nice thin coat right over the top. It doesn't have to be really thick, just put a thin even layer over the whole towel. It took about 30 minutes for this to dry. You'll notice there are teeny tiny brush streaks on this. They're not horrible. They are slightly noticeable, but it's also not tacky because we didn't overload the Mod Podge. Now we're going to take some transfers and rub on the top of our coaster that we are creating. Feel free to use whatever transfers you would like for this idea. I'm using my own personal creative brand called TDS, which is short for the DIY Struggle, and you can find this beautiful 8x10 set called Harmony at the DIYstruggle.com for anyone that's interested. I took the coaster and traced it on the back side of one of the transfers and then just trimmed down the section that I wanted to apply onto the top of the towel. And people, I'm not just saying this because they're my transfers. I'm just trying to be real with you. They're super tacky. So you're going to get one shot at this. Oh no! Yep, so I had to go do a whole nother prepping for another tile, cut a whole new transfer, and then gingerly make sure I was holding onto that sucker with both hands nice and tight before applying it onto the tile. So be careful when you're doing this at home. If you go to use transfers, it's not always the most forgiving thing. However, it's so worth it because look how beautiful the transfers turn out once they're onto the tile. Now you're just going to take some of that dishwasher safe Mod Podge and apply a very thin layer all over the piece. Now I put 3 layers all over this little transfer after it dried. It took me a whole day, if I'm being completely honest, to make sure that I was just applying thin layers. It minimizes the streaks that you can see sometimes using Mod Podge. I know people complain about that, but this is a little trick to have minimal brush strokes. And another little tip that I learned recently and have been testing out, and I'm pretty sure I got it from my TDS community over on Facebook. If you guys aren't hanging out with us over there, it's an amazing little community. I'm pretty sure I keep the link down in the description box or it's on the community tab, is to take some parchment paper and your iron and go over top of the whole piece. So once you've applied the last layer of Mod Podge, and in my case, like I said, I do real thin layers, at least 3 on pieces like this, let it dry, and then I came back the whole next day and did this, and people, it minimized the brush strokes even more. This is an absolute game changer if you struggle with that. Such a great tip. There are many different ways that you can finish up the bottom of a coaster. I decided to take some of this adhesive cork sheet from Dollar Tree, just trace it and cut it down to size, and apply on the bottom. I did add a little bit of tacky glue for some extra insurance that it wasn't going to go popping back off. And that's going to be it for this beautiful coaster. For this dishwasher safe Mod Podge coaster set, we're going to be decoupaging some napkins onto these. But first, we're going to knock off that sheen by just taking some of DIY's paint and putting a nice coat over the top and allowing it to dry. So we have a nice, not shiny or slick surface to give us a good start for our decoupage. I'm pretty sure this is the last of this napkin that I have in my stash, but why I love it so much is it's one that has 4 designs on it. So like I can get 4 projects out this sucker for the price of 1 napkin, you know what I'm saying? So I just cut out the little piece that I wanted to decoupage onto the towel, and I'm going to put the rest of it away. Back into my stash in case I need to call upon this napkin one day. Next, I'm just removing any of the sneaky layers on the back because we only need the top decorative layer to put onto the top of the tile. There's many different ways that you can do this. One of my favorites is just to tear a corner, and it usually reveals the sneaky little layers, and I can just pull them right off. Now we're just going to take a nice thick layer of that dishwasher safe Mod Podge and apply it all over our towels and allow it to dry. Once it's dry, grab some parchment paper, bring on in the iron, and start from one side of the tile and work your way all the way to the other side, slowly ironing on the napkin to the tile. When you're done, use some sandpaper to remove any of the excess, and then grab the dishwasher safe Mod Podge and put a nice thin layer over the napkin. But a little tip, I like to allow my pieces to dry at least 24 hours before applying the first thin top layer of the sealer. So keep that in mind. And for these particular pieces, I applied 3 complete coats, allowing them to dry in between applications. My local Dollar Tree finally got the 2025 calendars in, so I grabbed a couple, and there is a particular piece in my stash that I have been waiting to put one of these calendars on. I absolutely love this Choose Joy piece. One of my favorite sayings is don't let people steal your joy. And I thought this would look perfect on this gorgeous neutral wood Lazy Susan I have been waiting to decoupage. For the medium, I'm just going to use some Mod Podge, but feel free to use whatever medium works best for you. And since I want to do the iron on method, I'm going to put a nice thick heavy layer on this. Now I put so much on here because I've worked with these calendars before and I know how they are, and I let this sit overnight to dry. When your piece is completely dry, it's going to be nice and clear just like this, and then it'll be time to bring on in the iron. Now use whatever kind of iron you would like for this. I keep this little joint right next to me while I craft, so it's always my go-to, and I do turn it all the way up. After I had everything prepped, I realized that this little calendar did not reach all the corners of this Lazy Susan. I was kind of sad about it. However, it's also an opportunity for me to share with you how I'm going to fix this in case this struggle happens to you. I never like to miss out on an opportunity to help you in our time of craft need, because you might need the same thing I am. Anyhow, moving on. Grab you some parchment paper and then put it down over your calendar once you have it perfectly placed, and gingerly work your iron from one side to the next. Before you go sanding off any of the excess, you're going to want to stop and take a second and just pull up around the edges, making sure that if you're pulling this back a little bit, there's no peeling away from the project that you've ironed this onto. If so, you might need to add a little bit of Mod Podge or iron it a little bit longer to ensure that it's sealed down. When everything is all attached, just grab you some sandpaper and go in downward motions from the top to the bottom, separating your piece from the project all around the excess. You'll see here that the disconnect is buttery smooth. You will not always get this result if you decide to take the sandpaper and go back and forth. Sometimes it will tear the design on top of your piece. So just a little tip in case that happens to you. Remember how I said I'm going to show you how to fix things in case whatever your decoupage doesn't cover the full piece of your project? Grab you a stencil. And one of my favorite type of stencils, because I get asked this all the time, are ornate stencils. Usually I'll just go to Amazon and I will type in ornate stencils or damask stencils, and they got some options. Some can be a little pricey, but for the most part, they have some really nice pieces for you to pick from, and these are usually pretty easy to wash. I didn't want the piece looking awkward with just a spot or two of this stencil, so I took a second and just put some sections on here that I felt like would make sense for the piece, and it's absolutely stunning. And in case you're wondering, Brandy, how would you seal this? I would use some Rust-Oleum, either clear matte or satin spray paint, and do some very thin layers over the top of this. For this house number sign, we're going to need one of Dollar Tree's little crates and one of their larger pieces of wood. Now these are a little on the rough end, so you will need to sand off any extra bits. And then grab you some of Dollar Tree's wallpaper, or I mean, you can paint your piece if you want. I really like this wallpaper and I wanted to use this for this particular idea. I just trimmed it down to size and then removed the backing and gingerly attached it onto the piece of the wood, making sure to rub it in really well so we had a nice little bond. If you want, you could also spray some extra sticky stuff on the back of here for some extra adhesive. You could use whatever color paint you would like, but I chose to go with gray to paint the crate so it matched the wallpaper. I took the same paint, which blended in a little too much if I'm being honest, to paint our numbers onto our piece. You could absolutely use some stickers, or you could print out some vinyl letters or numbers, whatever would work best for you. I just wanted to show you that if you don't have any of that stuff on hand, you can absolutely freehand them on your own. To attach our crate, I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and remove a small section of this wallpaper. This is going to allow us to be able to put wood glue on top of wood and press the crate on here with the wood, so this way we get a nice bond. I did not paint the back of the crate, so there's no medium in here and there's no wallpaper preventing sticking from the crate to our wood piece. If you just put that wood glue over top of the wallpaper, then the actual crate itself is just going to stick to the wallpaper, not the piece of wood. You could absolutely drill little holes in the bottom of here and put some fresh florals in. And if you don't have a porch that is going to be able to protect the material, you could use a spray paint sealer that is outdoor friendly to make sure that this lasts. And I did hammer in a little nail to share how awesome a small lantern would look hanging from here. I don't know if I have been living under a rock and these have been at Dollar Tree for quite some time, but I feel like these were new to me at least. Have you guys seen these lidded plastic jar pieces? Because if you have, like, I'm missing out. I thought these would make a perfect cloche type piece. Just take the lid off, flip it upside down, and it actually fits on top of these candle holders pretty perfectly. However, I am a little concerned that they're going to fall off here quite easily if we're trying to reuse them. So I got an idea for that. First, take some tacky glue and glue that lid down and set that to the side to dry. Then find you some floral foam and cut a small piece of it large enough that it fits inside of the top of the candle holder with some lip, if that makes sense, like 1 inch. So this way, like once it's on the top, there's some room, you know what I mean? You'll see what I'm talking about. However, this is the wrong thing to do. I mean, at the time I thought I was being a smarty pants and I was like, oh, I'm just going to smoosh this down on top of the floral foam and it'll be the perfect size. However, when you try to get that out of there, it isn't coming back out. So do not do this. It's stuck. It's stuck. I finagled a little clay tool up in there and shaved some of the excess off, for anybody wondering how I solved that. Okay, then it was perfect and it fit on top our little candle holder. I got out the messy moss, attached the floral foam, and then started applying some more of that tacky glue onto the floral foam to put some moss all over everything. Then I grabbed a couple small florals and berries and started attaching them over top of the moss. You could obviously not attach them with tacky glue, so you can switch this out. But in case you're wondering, the purpose of us adding the little floral foam here was so that way the top of the cloche is not going to slide off when you decide to open it and switch out whatever you're keeping inside of this amazing little tabletop decor cloche piece. For this tabletop planter, we're going to need one of these wood pieces from Dollar Tree and a crate. And grab yourself a candle holder of whatever kind you would like. I grabbed this one with the thick bottom and then started to push some of my favorite paper clay into an ornate mold. You could use whatever mold you would like and whatever clay you would like. My favorite clay is paper clay, and I do keep that down in my Amazon store for anyone that's interested. A little tip if you struggle to figure out how to get your clay nice and flat on your pieces is just to take a dowel and go over it and gently smoosh off any excess. This can take a couple minutes, but it ensures that your clay is nice and flat. So once you take your wood glue and you attach it down onto your project, you won't have your extra pieces popping off in different sections of the clay. I allowed these to dry overnight, and a little tip that I also like to do before I start moving on when I have a project like this is just to kind of tug on it and kind of beat on it a little bit, making sure that everything's in place and it's not going to fall apart. Look how beautiful that turned out. This is one of my favorite molds that I have in my stash. I then I wanted to get a little colorful, so I grabbed lavender, and I'm pretty sure the paint was Waverly that I used, and just applied a coat to both the top part and the candle holder. When that was dry, I grabbed some of my Dixie Belle gilding wax in the silver and took a little paintbrush and just went over some of the raised sections and the details. If you don't have this, you could easily dry brush some paints, pick a color, and do the same exact thing. These large wood planks at Dollar Tree can be used for so many different DIYs. I'm going to be sharing this super easy and high-end stand idea with you. You're going to need a base. I grabbed these from my stash, use whatever you would like, and then the edges on these are pretty rough, so I'm going to sand them down just a little bit. You don't have to if you don't want to. For the color, I'm going to just use some Antique Waverly Wax with a baby wipe. I applied 2 thin coats. You can absolutely take this idea and remix it using whatever color you would like, or paint it if you don't want to stain it. The idea is totally remixable and customizable. To attach our base, I'm just going to use some of Type On Quick and Thick Wood Glue along with my hot glue. So this way we get a nice long hold and we get a quick hold. You can absolutely, like I said, use whatever way you want to create a kickstand. Dollar Tree also has like the little chalkboards with kickstand. I think I had some of them in my stash too, but I just figured I'd use this. Then take you some nautical rope. This is just some regular little rope I had, some rope twine I think is what it's called, in my stash, and just wrapped it around like 3 times and then tied a little bow on here. This stuff is definitely not stiff at all, so my bow was a little limp. You could use this idea for several different things. Photos would be a great way to be displayed on this piece, but I just decided to pop a couple floral pieces in here and absolutely love how elegant this looks.